raw food, vegetarian diets, and cardiometabolic health. So these are the results of a study that I conducted when I was working at Washington University in the beginning of my career in 2007 on, this is a cross-sectional study of 21 sedentary men and women practicing a low-calorie, low-protein, raw vegan diet for an average of 4.4 years. These 21 people, they have been consuming this diet for 2 to 10 years. As control groups, we had age and sex matched and BMI matched group of endurance runners consuming Western diets, and also 21 age and gender matched sedentary subjects consuming Western diets. So again, I recruited these 21 men and women by participating in some events of this St. Louis Vegetarian Society and through the Raw Food online magazine. And the subjects in this study were excluded if they were consuming any animal product, including meat, dairy, and eggs, or cooked or processed foods. So let's look at the results of this cross-sectional study. So as I said, they were matched by age. The age is around 53 years, as you can see here. The BMI of the raw food vegetarians and the endurance runners is basically the same, 21.3, and it's much lower than the sedentary control group eating Western diet, that is 26.5. That is still low compared to the average Americans. And body fat was lower in the endurance, but the vegetarians had higher percentage body fat than the endurance, but lower than the Western diet controls. Instead of the lean body mass was not different among groups. Now, from a dietary point of view, it's important to see that these raw food vegetarians were consuming a relatively calorie-restricted diet, around 2,000 calories, compared to 2,600 in the endurance and 2,400 in the Western diet. The percentage of carbs was lower in the low-calorie, low-vegetarian raw food dieters, but strikingly is the protein, that is, was much lower. 9.3% of calories of energy was from protein compared to 15 and 17%. And so around 0.7 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. Fat, instead of, was significantly higher, but fat was not, unlike the American diet, from saturated fatty acids or trans fatty acids that were very low, and also this SPA, the saturated were significantly lower than in the controls. So most of these high fat diet was from mono unsaturated, 21%, and polyunsaturated, almost 11%. Fiber, total fiber was also very high, 51%, 51 grams per day of fibers compared to 29 and 22. And potassium, also in dietary potassium was very high, and sodium salt was very, very low. Half of the typical sodium intake of endurance and sedentary people eating a typical Western diet. Now, let's look at the cardiometabolic risk factors. As you can see here, cholesterol, total cholesterol was, and LDL cholesterol were much lower than in the controls, 143 and 76. but also HDL cholesterol was lower than in, especially of the endurance athletes. We know that endurance exercise is increasing HDL cholesterol, but the HDL cholesterol was similar to the Western diet, but total cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, that are major risk factor for atherosclerosis, were much, much lower. And the ratio 2.7 was lower than the sedentary controls and similar to the endurance athletes. Triglycerides were also very low, around 56 milligram deciliter compared to 120 in the sedentary control groups. And again, we know that exercise has a powerful effect in reducing triglyceride and increasing HDL cholesterol. Now, let's look at the blood pressure. This is striking. Look, the blood pressure of these individuals that are on average 50 years old, it was 104/62, much, much lower than in the endurance and sedentary men and women consuming a typical Western diet. Fasting glucose was also lower than the sedentary controls. Fasting insulin was lower, and the HOMA, the insulin resistant index, was lower than in the controls, but not than in the exercises. C-reactive protein was lower than in the sedentary controls, and but not significantly lower than in the endurance runners. And the carotid artery intima-media thickness, that is a measurement with the echo Doppler of the thickness of the intima-media layer, was as low as in the endurance, but and lower than in the sedentary controls. Now here, you can see that total dietary fiber was inversely related with systolic blood pressure, very highly significant 0.0001. Similarly with diastolic blood pressure, and sodium intake was highly correlated in this study with systolic and diastolic blood pressure, and potassium, that was very high in the raw food vegetarian diet, was inversely correlated with systolic and diastolic blood pressure. So interesting data showing how powerful is a diet to change, especially cholesterol and blood pressure, and even C-reactive protein and IMT in humans. Of course, it's a cross-sectional study, it's not a randomized clinical trial, but it's the data are interesting and suggestive of the power of a minimally processed vegetarian, raw food vegetarian diet in drastically, markedly changing cardiometabolic risk factors. I'm going to present you in another couple of videos data about these groups on cancer risk factors, and also on bone health, because one of the problems of these long-term raw food vegetarian diet can be the low bone mass, so the risk of osteoporosis, as I will explain in another video that is going to follow this one. Thank you for listening.